This module will help you think deeper about the effect of social class on humans in society and education. Our ideals of equality and opportunity for all have led many of us to accept these notions at face value. Let's take a little time to understand the issue more deeply. Here's a quick pre-activity to figure out what you already think about social class. Brainstorm for 5 minutes on as many common adjectives, perceptions, or images of these words: rich, middle class, and poor. Do not go on to the next slide until you've exhausted your list. Stop the movie and restart it when you're ready to continue. American mainstream views of the rich. You probably came up with some of the words on the left. Things like jet setter, smart, famous, extravagant, and luxurious. These are all very positive images. We all could probably agree that most people aspire to attaining this lifestyle, since it's filled with so many images of power, influence, and comfort. Images of the middle class in America are just as positive as those of the wealthy. You probably came up with words like educated, white collar, suburbia, tax-paying citizens. This lifestyle is probably the one most of us realistically aspire to, longing for a good-paying job and a safe and clean neighborhood for our families. Looking at the images on the right and the words on the left, images of the poor starkly contrast those of the rich and the middle class. They are polar opposites, filled with negativity and degradation. Words like lazy, uneducated, enjoy being dependent on the government. And while we all aspire never to be poor, our fear of it prevents us from thinking clearly about how one becomes poor, as well as how it must feel to be poor. So let's learn a little bit more about it. Here's some facts about social classes in the U.S. Myth 1. Rich people only own a small portion of the wealth. In reality, the wealthiest 1% in our country owns about 35% of the wealth. Myth 2. Most people are middle class in the U.S. In actuality, the middle class comprise only about 43% of the population. Myth 3. All poor people are unemployed. Actually, 56% of the children in low-income families have at least one parent who is employed full-time and year-round. Here's some more. Myth 4. Poor people only live in the cities. Less than half of the children in urban areas, a third of the children in suburban areas, and little less than half of children in rural areas live in low-income families. Myth 5. Owning a home prevents people from low-income status. 43% of poor people who own homes have children compared to 83% of homeowners above poverty who have children. Myth 6. Having an education keeps people out of poverty. This is something all of us probably believe is true because we aspire to a higher education. In fact, people with less than a high school education are more likely to be poor. However, 57% of those with a high school education and 25% with some college are poor. Now take some time to reflect on what we've just covered. Try by answering these questions. What are the real differences in the lives of rich, middle class, and poor people? Do you think our perceptions of people from certain social classes are based on facts and investigation or personal experience and judgment? Why is there such a discrepancy between what we think about social classes and what we actually know? Stop the movie for a few minutes and give yourself some time to contemplate the answers to these questions. The second part of this module focuses on the social sciences. We'll be looking through sociology and psychology to help us to see how these disciplines explain and describe social classes and human behavior. Follow along and take notes to develop your understanding of the key terms and theoretical concepts. Sociology, as a discipline, tries to help us to understand the patterns of human behavior in large groups. A sociological view of social class leads us to the term stratification. It means when human beings in societies classify and rank order groups of people on a superiority-inferiority scale, or a hierarchy. They use this hierarchy to distribute resources, making it so that those at the top get more than those at the bottom. This system ultimately results in inequality. Looking at the photo on the right-hand side, you can see that human beings have organized themselves using stratification all the way back to ancient Egypt. Sociologists say that social class is stratification. That means that the way that we categorize people by social class is based on a superior-inferiority hierarchy. There are 5 resources that are distributed along this hierarchy: occupation, income, education, prestige, and power. Prestige is the amount of respect we get from others, and power is the amount of control we have over others. The table on the right shows you one way that sociologists have classified people in the U.S. along upper class, middle class, working class, and lower class. If we look closely at occupations, you can see how inferiority and superiority are ranked ordered. If you're in the upper class, you're likely to be a banker, a corporate executive, a physician, or an architect. However, lower class individuals tend to have unskilled, minimum wage workers or unemployed and on welfare. Looking across the other categories, you can see the same kind of pattern. Those at the top get more, and those at the bottom get less. Sociological research has found that the amount of resources people have determines their lifestyle. Look at the chart closely and see why income, education, and occupation shape the lifestyle of each class. What this means is that people can only live within the limits of the resources available to them. Now, try to test your understanding of the idea of social class and stratification, and add one more category that's not on the chart, say transportation. On your own, decide what type of transportation each class will have and be able to afford or access. Now stop the movie for a few minutes and answer the questions before continuing. The next discipline we go on to is psychology. If you've taken Psych 206 or another class like it, you may have already seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember, psychology is different from sociology, and that psychologists tried to explain and describe the individual psychological state and emotions as they interact with others around them. The idea of this psychological scheme is that individuals and human beings need to have the needs at the bottom filled before they can become productive, self-actualized individuals. If their needs at any of these levels are not filled, they will have difficulty developing and becoming healthy, happy individuals. Now let's apply Maslow's theory to the real world by looking at a hypothetical example. These twins grew up together. Their parents provided each one with the necessary emotional, psychological, and physical resources in Maslow's theory. In the end, they became self-actualized adults. Now, let's assume that each twin had different families. Waldo grew up with his parents, and Oswald grew up with an adopted family. Waldo grew up much as he did in the first scenario, with all his emotional, psychological, and physical needs met. Oswald, on the other hand, had a stable home until he was 6, when his adopted father lost his job. His father never regained his income level, which meant his family struggled to make ends meet until Oswald was 18. This meant sometimes Oswald's needs were not met. Oswald's family is low income. What his father provided was commensurate with the resources available to them, while Waldo's family was middle class, and they could afford to give him things that other middle-class families could. These identical twins grew up very differently as each one of them belonged to a family from a different social class. That is to say, that who and what Oswald and Waldo become is linked to the social and economic resources their families have available to them, by virtue of their social class status, even if the two are biologically identical. This means that social class matters in the development of human beings. Here are some tentative conclusions about social class and society. This module has shown that an interdisciplinary approach to social class, through sociology and psychology, can debunk some of the myths we have about it. It has presented the following points. Most people in the U.S. are not middle class, and only a sliver of the population is wealthy. Our perceptions of and attitudes toward social classes are often unexamined, untested, and uninformed. Both disciplines in the social sciences demonstrate that social class has a significant impact on human beings. And finally, the effects of social class suggest that an individual's motivation and desire for mobility is not enough. There are real social forces at work against his or her success. Now spend a few minutes thinking about what you've learned and write it down. Also write down anything that is unclear or any disagreements or questions you have about the module and bring them to class.